Everybody, how you doing? You know, I've been doing these Sunday night discussions. I don't know how long I'll keep doing them, probably at least till the fall, but I've done several on Eric Clapton, and I did one on Jesus Christ Superstar. I've done several, and I think kind of related to both of those, among other things I've talked about, I wanted to talk a little bit about a great artist that I sort of think doesn't get enough credit, and that is Yvonne Elliman. I know some I know some of you have heard of Yvonne Elliman, and you probably may, depending on who you are, you may have heard of her in different capacities. If you're a Jesus Christ Superstar fan, like I am, huge, then you for sure have heard of her as Mary Magdalen. If you're an Eric Clapton fan, you probably know that she played in his band for a lot of years. And if you were a disco fan, disco, you know, I was a Disco Sucks, Detroit Rockers engaged in the abolition of disco person back in the day. But she did do some good disco songs. And now that I'm older, I look at it and I realize they're really well put together songs. And she's also been in a couple other movies and things. But I don't think she's really done a lot. If I do say, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing her career, but I don't think she's done a lot since the 80s. But she certainly, coming out of the late 60s and then all through the 70s, was a fixture in pop music and just a great voice and an actress that did some good roles and did some pretty special music, really. So I wanted to say a little bit about her. I hope you'll watch. Well, Yvonne Elliman had kind of an interesting background. I don't know if that contributed to her making people interested in her, but she was part Japanese American and part Irish American, and she was raised on Hawaii. She was born in 1951, and I saw in one of the interviews she said Hawaii was a great place in the 50s. That was like the heyday of Hawaii, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it was before all the tourists showed up, but it was kind of on the way up, and that might have been a good time. Probably great youth. But she became kind of a folk singer when she was young. So she's a guitar player. I think that's one of the things I don't think that always people realize is she was kind of a folk singer and plays guitar quite well, acoustic guitar, and even wrote a few of her own songs. I looked through some of her discs. I didn't try to go through them methodically, but I only saw about two of her songs that I saw. There are probably some more out there, but that were ever recorded on the ones I looked at. One was called Hawaii, and the other one was called Up to the Man. But she wrote her own songs, and she performed a lot. And she was also kind of a hippie. This was the late 60s, and if you weren't there, you maybe don't understand. But that was a pretty weird time, a great time, really. But it was a time, among all the other things going on in the 60s, it was a great time for the arts and music. And the Vietnam War, there was a lot going on, but it just was one of those special times where music really seemed to capture people in a very special way, and you had a lot of great music coming out. And I don't think she was all that. She wasn't, sweating trying to become the valedictorian of her little high school in Hawaii. It doesn't sound like. She might have been on the way to having a kind of troubled adulthood, and it sounded like one of her choir directors kind of took her under his wing and helped make arrangements when he saw how talented she was and sent her to London. So when she went to London, she started playing in a lot of restaurants and things, and that was pretty neat. And I think that acoustic kind of folksy, kind of folk rock, but kind of hippie folk music was an important element of her career, especially early on. I've got a couple of her albums. Let me show you. I have two of her albums. This is her first album, Yvonne. And this is another one I have. Now, she did some other early albums, but I would say you can hear that kind of folk rock and also kind of a lounge singer. You know, she was a great singer and very skilled. I mean, she wasn't just kind of up there winging her way through sort of her own compositions of varying quality. She was really, you know, could really take good songs that were really well written and do them, you know, really well. And so she went over to London, and I guess she was singing there and just kind of, you know, there was a lot of music at that. I feel like there was a lot more music at that time. And after she got done with one performance in some place, a guy came up and said, "You're my Mary Magdalen, you're my Mary Magdalen." And it was Andrew Lloyd Webber, the writer of Jesus Christ Superstar. So she ended up...
See the roses way up high, hazy sketches in the sky, scattered lines of colored hue, cloudy faces in the blue, shining down like morning dew. Mary Magdalene. See the white birds flying high, seems so easy on the eye. Sometimes you wonder where they go. They seem so easy, seem so slow. White birds from heaven on down below. Mary Magdalene. And I was coming down right when the daylight came, and I could see that eastern sky with the colors all aflame. And the dawn was breaking, I could see it shining in the morning light. Golden rays of colors, scattered lines of morning, rosy, pink and white. I remember how the night was dark and long. I was picking on my box guitar. I could see it shining, I could hear the music playing from afar. Coming down when the daylight came, and I could see that eastern sky with the colors all aflame. And the dawn was breaking, I could see it shining lines of morning, rosy pink and white. They say you smell of sweet perfume from an alabaster jar. I could see it shining, I could hear the music playing from afar. Millions of people look above. They see the light of your true love. Sometimes you wonder if they know. They see the light of heaven's glow shining with them wherever they go. Mary Magdalen. Sometimes you wonder if they know. They see the light of heaven's glow shining with them wherever they go. Mary Magdalene.
So she ended up being in Jesus Christ Superstar, first in the stage production, and I've got that album. This is the one, by the way, with Ian Gillan on it. This is the one with Ian Gillan, and you know, there's not too much footage of that. That would have been great to see, but it's a pretty nice album, and this was a huge album. This was a couple years before the movie came out. And the movie, of course, had Ted Neely in it as Jesus Christ Superstar. But Yvonne Elliman was one of the few. I think the guy who played Pontius Pilate was Barry Deneen, was also a holdover from the stage production to the film. But most of the cast changed, including Ian Gillan. But you got a lyric booklet. It's a very nice album. And this is a huge album. And it was part of... a lot of music at that time. This was when pretty serious music was. So Jesus Christ Superstar was one of several rock operas, of which I would include, by the way, Tommy. There's Hair. That's another one. And Godspell, another kind of rock opera based on the gospel. In this case, the Gospel of Matthew. Those are all great. I would say that Hair's got some really good songs on it, you know. But Jesus Christ Superstar is as good as any of them. I'm kind of partial to Tommy, but maybe it's because I like The Who so much. But Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice is the sort of librettist and lyricist. But Andrew Lloyd Webber just wrote some killer songs. And, you know, later, if you like kind of torch songs like Memories and the Phantom of the Opera stuff, that's really good. But I think Jesus Christ Superstar is terrific. And one thing I will say about that, Yvonne Elliman did those roles, and that's musical theater, and those are not easy roles. I mean, you had a lot of kind of talk singing parts. You had to act, of course, well. But you had sort of those mid-tempo ballads that you had to really belt out. Of course, I Don't Know How to Love Him was the kind of the signature song, really one of the, probably the most popular song in the musical among several. But you also had a lot of parts where people would kind of, there were almost like it was like an opera, almost like recitatives and a lot of dialogue that was kind of sung, and you had to be very precise. And so it took a really, not only a good voice, but a really good musician to do that. And Yvonne Elliman, I think that's one thing sometimes people forget about her. She was a very good musician. She had to be in that theater production, because in musical theater, you've got to know what you're doing. You know, you can't just kind of do your own thing. But you also have to be kind of loose because it's all live, and, you know, and there's a feel every night's a little different too, but you have to know what you're doing. And so she took that role and did a great job. and then became Mary Magdalen. Now I did, and then when the movie came out, she really was sort of cemented in the popular mind. I think for a lot of people, that's what they'll always when they always. And I read the Bible and grew up with the Bible. So, but Mary Magdalene's an interesting figure. But she's one of the, I think, people most associated with that. They'll probably be writing about her as Mary Magdalene in scholarship or something, hundreds of years from now, because she was so definitive in that role. One thing I did read, or I saw her, she was not too crazy about it. She didn't even know who Mary Magdalene was when Andrew Lloyd Webber came up. She thought Mary Magdalene was the Virgin Mary, the mother of Christ. So she had no clue, and she got tossed into that big role, and so she was kind of typecast. And she's on an episode of Hawaii Five-0, and that was kind of in the disco period, but she was on an episode of Hawaii Five-0, and I watched that. I kind of bought it off Amazon Prime, and they kind of played on that. She was sort of this wholesome Hawaiian sister, and her brother was kind of tied in with the mob, and she was kind of this good girl that went to church, and but was also sang great and was in music, and so they showed her singing in church, and I kind of thought that was her image, and I think she kind of chafed at that because when she was with Eric Clapton said she was one of the boys. She liked to drink and party and do other things just as much as any of the other guys in the band, which is saying a lot if you look at Eric Clapton in that period. So, but she was kind of typecast as this wholesome girl, and she said she would get jobs, going to the hospital and holding people's hands when they were dying, and so she really didn't like it, and it doesn't sound like she was raised with much religion, so she didn't. I don't know. I mean, if you don't know the difference between the Virgin Mary and Mary Magdalene, you probably haven't read the Bible all that much. I think that's a safe assumption. But she was sort of typecast, and it sounds like she's, in her own little way, one of those people that was typecast, that chafed at it. I was thinking like Herman Munster, Fred Gwynne. Fred Gwynne was an excellent actor, and was in like Ibsen's Dollhouse. But it's kind of hard to cast him in King Lear. We're gonna make Fred Gwynne, who was famous for playing Herman Munster, we're going to make him, the Shakespeare King Lear, and as soon as everybody sees him, they think, hey, that's Herman Munster. Same with Mr. Spock, all those people. She was a little bit typecast like that, and it sounds like she kind of chafed at it. But just owned that role, did a great job, and I think it shows. And on these early albums, now she did in that period some of these early albums, and I just have a couple. She did another one called Food of Love. I might even have it around here somewhere, but I get so tired of fishing around for albums. But there's some good songs on here. This one has I Don't Know How to Love Him. So that was kind of that was number one hit, and I'm old enough to remember that was huge. It was almost like the Carpenters or something, huge hit. But on Food of Love, I don't have a copy of it, but she's got one, I Don't Know How to Love Him Blues, and it's kind of, I don't know if she's cutting it down, but she sounds like she's sick of it. It sounds like she was sick of being Mary Magdalene. She was sick of being kind of cast as this saint figure, But the music I like her early albums. Now, she got famous later for doing disco, and I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But in some ways those disco albums, whatever you want to say about disco, and I was listening to Bob Seger and a lot of people like that when disco was popular. So believe me, Steve Dahl burning disco records at Wrigley Field, I remember all that, and I was of that mindset at that time. But a lot of that disco, I would say some of her disco stuff's really well done, well produced, and she does it great. But I really like these albums. In these albums you hear like singing to a grand piano or with nice acoustic guitar. There's a Gilbert and Sullivan song on here that's really beautiful, Nothing Rhymed. Of course, Gilbert Sullivan wrote Alone Again Naturally, Claire. Awesome. You play, I used to, still do play a lot of acoustic guitar, and I used to play a lot in restaurants. And every once in a while we'd try to do Alone Again Naturally, and that's a really it's one of those songs that just kind of flows along, but it's very well written and it's not that easy to play. And she does a lot of those songs. The other thing I'll say about these early, like, these are like 1971, 72 albums. They remind me, there's a certain sound they have that reminds me of drive-in movies in that period, which I'm a kind of, that's a guilty pleasure. I'll sit and watch some of those old drive-in movies. Watch my song Drive-In Angel. That was kind of a tribute to some of those old drive-in movie stars. But the drive-in movies of that period were great, but they would always have pretty good music, you know. And a lot of it was, a lot of times, you know, it wouldn't be stuff you'd necessarily heard, but the style. But she sings a lot to piano. There's a kind of folk sensibility, but you have that kind of, I think that, not musical theater, but you have that kind of pretty serious songs on here. The other thing I wanted to say about some of these albums, I wish she had done some more of her own songs. I feel like she was always doing other people's songs, and probably she was signing record contracts and would have people telling her what to do all the time. And I thought sometimes, you know, she could have been maybe more, I mean, she was obviously very successful, but if you could have given her some more like Paul Williams caliber songs like Karen Carpenter had to sing or something, I think, because that Andrew Lloyd Webber song is right up there with that, you know, like a Paul Williams type song, and she just hit it out of the park. And I think it stands out as being one of the most well-written kind of mid-tempo ballads, which is her forte. She's got some other good ones on here, but I think just as a song, that I Don't Know How to Love Him is like the best song on any of these albums. They're all done well. They've got good musicians on them. But I think that song, I Don't Know How to Love Him, is such a good song. And if every song on this album, these early albums, were that good, I think she would have been, you know, even more successful. I've listened to music a long time. I wouldn't say these albums were, I don't want to say filler, but, you know, you had that one song, I Don't Know How to Love Him, and she did these albums, and I think people liked them, but I don't think they're as well remembered today, so it's worth remembering. In 1974, now she was married to a guy from RSO Records, and they did Eric Clapton, but they also did the Bee Gees and some other things. So she was kind of in a lot of those circles, and somehow or another she ended up in Miami, and ended up singing background vocals with Eric Clapton on this album, 461 Ocean Boulevard. Did so well. And now Eric Clapton says this, so we're not trying to be gossipy, although we all like that, don't we, a little bit. She had an affair with Eric Clapton. But she ended up being on 461 Ocean Boulevard, and then sings quite a bit. Get Ready's, I think, a song that those two really kind of sing well together on. By the way, I'm not playing any songs on here, clips or anything. But did so well that she ended up being in his band for several albums. She was on, after 461 Ocean Boulevard, she toured with them. She was on this album, There's One in Every Crowd. She was on this album, EC Was Here. That's a live album, so she played live with them. You know, I saw Eric Clapton in 1978. I'm going to see him September 23rd in Atlanta. I can't wait. I cannot wait. And I paid good money for those tickets, man. When I think of what ticket prices were, the first concert I saw Bob Seger, Todd Rundgren, Elvin Bishop, and Point Blank for $7. And I used to go see concerts with like some of the greatest bands in the world, and it wouldn't even be $10. And these tickets were $700, but I'm going to see Clapton. And I saw him in '78, and I used to think I'd seen Marcy Levy. I was about 16 at the time, 17. But I think because she did tour with them, but that was not Yvonne Elliman. That was Marcy Levy. But she was on this live album, so she was prominently featured on several Eric Clapton albums. She was on this album, which is No Reason to Cry. Super good album. That's the one where Bob Dylan and the band showed up with Eric Clapton's band, which included, Yvonne and also Dick Sims, Jamie Oldacre, and George Terry and Carl Rattle. Super good band. I personally think it's the best kind of stable band that Clapton ever had. I love that band. Derek and Domino's was great, but they only did one album, and and Dwayne Allman showed up, and it kind of turned into a jam. So, but I think in terms of sort of a stable period, that I love that Tulsa band. This is a great album. Yvonne's on this one, and then she was on Slowhand, and she sings. If you know the song "The Core," her voice is prominently featured on "The Core." But Marcy Levy came on, I think, on that album. Was she on No Reason to Cry? I'd have to check. But Marcy Levy's on No Reason to Cry. Marcy Levy sings "Innocent Times" on great Detroit young lady, Marcy Levy, and sang with Clapton. Now, Yvonne Elliman was not on Backless, which is one of my favorite Eric Clapton albums. But right around the time she quit playing with Clapton, she ended up doing disco. And I've seen interviews with her where she said that, she wasn't that crazy about disco. She was rock and folk. I think, she said she liked rock, but I would characterize her style as kind of folk, like Joni Mitchell. She has her own style, but but very good. And in a way, because she has that background in choir and theater, I think that's an important component of her music that sometimes some other singers maybe don't have, because when you're in choir and theater, you really learn to sing well. But she ended up and sing with precision. You have to really be able to follow a tune, and but she ended up on disco. Almost like I said, it took me a while to get there. But I was watching that Hawaii Five-0 episode, and it was set in the disco period, and so it was just TV soundtrack disco. But I was listening to it, and I thought, you know what? There's good guitar. There was like an orchestra, like it was NBC, ABC, CBS, whatever. But it was one of those TV orchestras. So a lot of disco had like orchestra. There was piano, like piano, not like great bass and drums, a good rhythm section. And I thought, I'll take that any day over some of these drum loop EDM songs. So. And her big hit, she had a couple. She does that song, "I Can't Get You Out of My Mind." That's a beautiful song that was a hit for her. And they kind of featured that a little bit in that Hawaii Five-0 episode. And she had a couple others. But, of course, her big hit was she sang a Bee Gees song, "If I Can't Have You, I Don't Want Nobody, Baby." Now, I was a little too young to catch the Bee Gees in the 60s. But I was right in high school. I mean, I was in the prime of music listening youth when that album came out, and I rejected it. I didn't like it, and it was the image thing of disco. And most of my friends felt the same, and we didn't hang out with probably half the high school that did like disco. It was kind of one of those big divides. So I did, and the Bee Gees had "Staying Alive," but you can't help but like "How Deep Is Your Love." What a great song! But now that I'm older, I was in my 30s or 40s before I really started I started hearing a lot of Bee Gees, early Bee Gees, like "I Started a Joke." "How Can You Mend a Broken Heart," "Lonely Days and Lonely Nights." I mean, any of those songs, and they are so good. The Bee Gees were just great, and they kind of made that shift to disco in the mid-'70s, and that was the period when I was exposed to the Bee Gees, and I'd heard a lot of those songs, like "You Don't Know What It's." I'm in a duo. We play a couple of those old Bee Gees songs, like "You Don't Know What It's Like Baby, you don't know what it's like. Those are such good songs. And if you listen to that, I Can't Have You, If I Can't Have You, I Don't Want Nobody, Baby, you can hear it's a Bee Gees song. They do it, it shows you how important arrangement and style is, because you could have taken that, some of those disco songs of the Bee Gees and moved them back 10 years and done them in a 60s style as kind of mid-tempo ballads, including that one. It's a great song. It's a great song. You know, it was done as a disco song, if you like disco or not, but it's a great song. It's a Barry Gibb. I don't know if Robin wrote it, but I've learned to respect the Bee Gees. They might be some of my favorite songwriters. I should do something about them. But Yvonne did that song and did sort of became a feature of disco, you know. She looked great, you know, she was always really pretty. And that didn't hurt. And she had a killer voice. And again, that Bee Gees song changes key a couple times. It's got a couple tempo changes, and you've got to be pretty good to sing it. She pulls it off great. So definitely a great song. And then I think in the early '80s, she was a mother, and you know, like I said, I don't want to mischaracterize her career, but you know, it sounds like she wasn't as active, you know, and she hasn't really been all that active in a long time. But great artist. I mean, when you think about it, a folk singer, kind of a hippie folk singer, musical theater. She was in she has one of the most standout roles of any theatrical performance, if you think about it. I mean, that Mary Magdalen part, I mean, you think about the great people of musical theater, Julie Andrews. I mean, her role was huge. You know, that Yvonne Elliman as Mary Magdalen was great and so well done. So then she was a rock and roll chick, if you will, as they used to say. Killer, you know, sang with Clapton, belted him out with Eric Clapton for years, and was on some of his greatest albums. And kind of then ended up being on some big disco records. I think it's too bad she didn't do more of her own songs. And I don't know. Like I said, I wasn't there, but I feel like she probably had record contracts and would be given stuff to sing. And for example, I read that she was almost going to sing "How Deep Is Your Love," it's one of those. Like I said, those Bee Gees wrote such good songs, and that song is just beautiful. I wish they did it a little bit more like a late '60s song, less disco-y, but it's a beautiful song, gorgeous, gorgeous. "How Deep Is Your Love." But they were going to give that to her. That's how it's often said. And then they decided, well, we'll do it ourselves. But it sounds like she was kind of vulnerable to whatever executives or other artists decided to give her. And so I feel like when she got a chance to sing a really great song, she would hit it out of the park. And I feel like when you look at some of those solo albums, I feel like not every song's as good as the ones we've heard of. I guess I'll just say that. But an awesome artist. I really recommend you listen. Especially, I would recommend some of those early '70s albums. They're definitely worth having around. Well, thank you. God bless you. Good night.